Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Risa Levitt, and I'm manager of publishing and editorial director of ROM magazine at the Royal Ontario Museum. Thank you so much for joining us today for this ROM Connects program that is generally supported by the Schmidt family. I'd like to begin this program by acknowledging that ROM sits on what have been the ancestral lands of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Anishinaabe Nation, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, since time immemorial to today. I'm delighted that you could join us for today's program in support of a new digital project that we're launching on August 24th called Ukraine Identities, Culture, and Resilience. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter for making this program possible. So a little bit of this project. In 2019, a team from ROM traveled to Ukraine to interview Ukrainians about identity and culture. 3 years later, today, recent events compel us to reflect on what it means to preserve identity and heritage. Today's conversation takes us back to Ukraine in 2019 to explore this project and its subsequent journey with the team members who have been working on this digital experience and who will share their perspectives in advance of the project's digital launch later this month. During today's program, please feel free to submit your questions to us via the Q&A feature on your screens. And we'll be leaving time at the end of this program for a discussion and to address your questions. This project, Ukraine Identities, Culture, and Resilience, presents a series of videos that explore Ukrainian identities and culture through diverse voices in modern Ukraine. This project will be available online via the ROM's website, with new content being released throughout the fall. I'd like us to begin with a brief introduction, a snapshot of the videos that were recorded in Ukraine in 2019.
One of the things that's always been in the way of Ukrainian success was, by the way, the thing with which you started the conversation, the notion of identity and the lack of, to my mind, of understanding that you may find your distinct identity in respecting diversity.
Ukraine has never been and is not a mono-ethnic country, and it was always built on the melt, on the combination, on the cooperation and dialogue of different cultures, and I think this is one of the most important and valuable things that we have.
На теренах України завжди мешкали різні народи, вони співіснували. І якщо євреї живуть в Україні, то це українські євреї. Якщо німці мешкали на півдні України, то це українські німці. Всі ці там культурні групи, вони так чи інакше створювали місцеву культуру.
Ми назвали свій напрямок етнохаусом. Тут йдеться про те, що основа нашої творчості є українська етнічна традиція, але разом з тим ми знайомимось з усім світом, ми відкриті до світу і з різних частин етнічних складників ми робимо нашу музику.
Хочу починати з того, що мої батьки, незалежно від того, де би ми не жили, а батько як військовослужбовець ми їздили по всьому Радянському Союзу, тривалий час мешкали в Сибіру, були на Дальньому Сході, Радянського Союзу, але завжди кругом вдома ми розмовляли тільки українською мовою. Батьки ніколи не давали мені такої можливості забути, хто я є.
The Ukrainian identity is fighting for independence. The Ukrainian identity is developing your land. The Ukrainian identity is depicting the beautiful nature around you. Ukrainian identity is Ukrainian music because we are very romantic and melodic people. Ukrainian identity is its language, and it's very tragic but very diverse history.
Thanks very much for that. I just want to mention, I'm not sure if this was the case for everybody, but some of you were seeing a black box that might have been preventing you from reading the captions. I would ask you all to really, check back in once this program is live, because these videos are, they're just so compelling, so engaging. And there's one point where a musician mentions that the genre of their music is called ethno-chaos, which is just fantastic and just speaks to this idea of identity and exploring those aspects of one's personal journey and identification that we'll be focusing on today. So please, I encourage you to check back in and check out these videos. I'd like to introduce you all to our guests for this discussion today. And I'd like to start with Dr. Risa Levitt, who is a professor of Hebrew, Bible, and Judaism at San Diego State University, where she serves as chair of the Department for the Study of Religion, the Classics and Humanities Department, and is director of the Jewish Studies program. Born and raised in Toronto, Risa worked closely with the Israel Antiquities Authority on multiple Dead Sea Scrolls exhibitions, including as curator for the exhibition's Toronto presentation at ROM in 2009. Hi, Risa, welcome. Myroslav Shkrandrij is professor emeritus at the University of Manitoba, where he taught Slavic studies until 2019 and is presently a visiting professor at Columbia University, New York. Myroslav recently published a book titled Revolutionary Ukraine, 1917 to 2017, Flashpoints in History and Contemporary Memory Wars. It's a book that examines revolutionary upheavals in Ukraine over the past 100 years. Myroslav, I'm not sure if you can see us. We'd love to see you. If you could just turn on your camera when you're comfortable. Nice, excellent. Our next guest is Anzhelika Vengrus. Anzhelika was born in Kyiv, Ukraine, and comes from a diverse ethnic background with ancestors who were Hungarian, Greek, Ukrainian, and of Jewish and Russian descent. Surrounded by different languages since childhood, Anzhelika works as a translator to help people communicate. With a keen interest in cultural and museum projects, Vengrus has been part of ROM's Ukraine project since 2019. And I just want to let everybody know that Anzhelika is joining us live from Kyiv today. Hi, Anzhelika. I hope you can hear us.
Yes, hi.
Amazing. If you get a chance to turn on your camera when you're comfortable, please do so.
Let's try.
Oh, there you are.
You see me. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
And
nice to see you today.
Our final guest for this panel is Daniela Rupolo, who is a video producer at ROM. After earning an HBA from the University of Toronto and a certificate in new media journalism from Sheridan College, Daniela began her career at CBC Toronto. She has been shooting and editing since she was a teenager and is passionate about photography and long-form storytelling to inspire positive change. Welcome, Risa, Myroslav, Anzhelika, and Daniela. I'm looking forward to our discussion over the next hour. as we explore this project from each of your perspectives. So let's kick off to find out a little bit more about the project. And Risa, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your work on this project and what drew you to the subject of Ukrainian identities?
Sure, thanks. And thanks for having me here today, wherever that is. Well, as you mentioned, I had done some work with the ROM previously on a Dead Sea Scrolls exhibition, which of course is much closer to my area of expertise. But when the ROM made a decision to work on a Ukrainian exhibition, they came to me, obviously not so much because of my being connected to Ukraine in any specific way, but really from the prospect of using a curator as a storyteller. And so when I traveled to Ukraine, and I made 3 trips over the course of about 2.5 years, I came from very little knowledge of the country, the people, the situation, and was trying, like, I guess, a museum goer, to figure out the context, understand what was going on. And very quickly met Anzhelika, I should say, who was probably the first official Ukrainian that I met on the first day of my trip. And we remained together and friends and working together ever since. But it seemed clear that it was such a complex place that I really had no idea that you could have a country that had very, very short-lived periods of independence throughout its 1,000-year history, but at the same time had a very unique, developed culture, language, sensibility that was very, very different from everything, all of the countries that surrounded it. So, for example, I think I very naively thought that Ukraine would very much be like my previous visits to Russia. And I was obviously very wrong about that. So that really led to discussions with Anzhelika, and then when Daniela was later brought into the project, about trying to understand what it meant to live in a country that technically was only about 30 years old, but that had a 1,000-year history with very, very brief periods of independence, this past 30 years probably being the longest. And what that meant in terms of how people thought about themselves in the country, outside of the country, what their identity meant to them, how they defined it. And what we found was quite fascinating, that everybody we talked to had a very strong notion of identity, but at the same time, nobody sort of really agreed on what it was. And certainly people in the arts, for example, or in academia, came to that answer in very, very different ways. And so that's when we decided that this was a worthwhile thing to start asking people. And we asked as many people as we could from all different walks of life, from all different perspectives. We didn't have access to the entire country. Obviously, it's a huge country. So we're very focused in our work on primarily Kyiv and Lviv. So we recognize that there's a limitation there, but what we ended up with was a really wonderful conglomeration, if you will, of perspectives. And that was sort of it at the time. And then, of course, COVID hit and everything was paused, and we weren't really sure what would happen with all the work that we did. And then, of course, Russia invaded Ukraine. And suddenly these questions that we were asking became very, very relevant. And at the same time, while many people that I was talking to were very surprised by, how resilient the Ukrainians were and how the country didn't fall immediately, I wasn't surprised at all. And actually, I had conversations with Daniela very early on about, everything we had heard made sense to us in this context and was reiterated by the way people were behaving, volunteering, standing up for who they were, for their country and for their identity. And that's when the idea to resuscitate these videos and to give them a new life really happened.
It's so fascinating. And I think one of the biggest things I think the rest of the world saw earlier this year was this idea of Ukrainians uniting and just presenting themselves as this unified force. And so I'd like to explore that a little bit more. And Daniela, Risa mentioned that you accompanied her. And as what I'd like to know more is in the process of shooting this video in Ukraine in 2019, tell me a little bit about your experience. Tell me a little bit about what has your experience been since then, as you've been editing those videos, revisiting that, from 3 years ago.
Yeah, so I'd just like to briefly give a shout out to Randy, my manager, who was also with us in Ukraine. We worked together, traveling and shooting. It's always challenging, obviously, when you're conducting interviews in a language that you don't understand. Anzhelika was very helpful in that. But beyond the conversation itself, you have to make sure that as a shooter, you're giving yourself what you need for editing in the future. So having the speaker finish a thought before the translation begins, and then you can proceed with the next question. There were times when I felt like an annoying director who was just jumping in at odd times during some very intense and personal discussions. So it was very fascinating and also difficult in ways that, speaking to people about something completely new to you in a language that is new to you would be. But now when I'm editing the interviews, I appreciate, first of all, that, I made sure that the interviews were clean and people finished their thoughts and sentences before moving on to the next question. But it's really sombering to put the videos together right now. At the time, we asked everybody about identity, and everyone had obviously very thoughtful and varied answers, as Risa was saying. And the original idea Risa had was to have everybody speak to camera and say, I'm so-and-so and I'm Ukrainian. And I remember asking, well, what does that mean to them? What is Ukrainian identity? And that, of course, led to a whole discussion amongst our team about, national pride, identity globally, what is Canadian identity? And we had a hard time answering that. There's obviously a lot of nuances. But I think what makes this so interesting is that Ukrainians have been tasked with protecting and asserting their unique identity for generations, but some of the people we spoke to, like Risa was saying, couldn't really articulate what that was. It's a complicated question, but of course, when your neighbor is trying to stamp out any sense of identity that you have, it becomes a really important question. So I'm going through these interviews and videos, and I'm fondly remembering the conversations we had with people and hearing their perspectives. But I'm also wondering, of course, how they are now, where they are now, and if their answers would be the same. And I think in a lot of cases, their answers would be the same. And that's what was so fascinating, that a lot of people foresaw the current situation because Ukraine has been in the shadow of Russia for so long. I don't know if that answered your question.
that and more. Thank you for that. And again, this idea of people being very, very aware of, Russia's neighboring presence. And also, this isn't like Russia had already invaded Ukraine. So that push for asserting, I love that point that you made about not just having to assert, but also defend. It's, people having to defend their identity. Anzhelika, I really want to hear about your perspective. You bring a very unique perspective. You're joining us from Kyiv today. You had to relocate recently. Can you share a little bit, please, as you worked on this project, translating what was your experience like when you were interviewing people? And can you speak a little bit about the diversity of voices, the variety of voices that are reflected, that Daniela touched upon?
Well, yes. First, I would like to thank you, all of you, so our ROM team, Dr. Levitt, Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, the greatest team I have ever worked with. Of course, we did lots of projects, and I believe that we will proceed after our victory. So, of course, all Ukrainians now believe in their victory. That's the first point of Ukrainian identity. For today, everybody believes. Yeah, so many stars, and actually, even in those days, in 2019, before the pandemic started, when we made all this interview, when we listened to people, and I translated some of them, in every interview, it was like a piece when you agree totally. So with this person who says this, then another person says reflects his point of view about the Ukrainian identity, and you agree. And it's really a big variety, and it's pretty hard to find, you're completely right, it's pretty hard to find one certain reply for one certain answer for this. And as sounded for me like Dr. Levitt 2 minutes ago, it seems she reflects and she knows even better Ukrainians than we know, because she explained actually everything in a couple of words. So for now, yes, I had to be relocated for a while because I appeared on the day when the war started. I was in Mykolaiv. It's near Odessa, so I think that now many people know where Mykolaiv is. And unfortunately, it's a big catastrophe there now. And the war, we know, so everybody knows that the war has started actually 8 years ago. And during all these 8 years, it was like some people, they were not indifferent. I cannot say that people were indifferent. It was like you're living with the feeling, with a strong feeling that something will happen. And when the war started, there was no panic at all. People just went to ATMs and to gas stations, and that's it. Nobody was crying, nobody was running, I didn't see anybody in a hurry. So it was like very organized, and I was surprised that people would be such organized, well organized. And you're completely right that now we are uniting, because at some point, of course, we were different on western part and eastern part and southern part, but these first days, these very first days, people were so united that you can feel this with every piece of every cell. And I have many friends and relatives who are in war now, and as I said, even those who do not believe in God or who do not trust, who are not very religious, they tell that we felt this. We felt this with our body, like it was in the air, and it helped. It helped people to survive, and this is why we didn't fall down during these first 3 days. Which were supposed to be the end of Ukraine, so to say. Yes, it was our naive feeling that we could be independent after all these centuries of trying to get this independency, and of fights. We were naive that in 21st century, who could ever believe in a big war, continental war, or something like that, and especially Russia, how it's possible? They should be democratic, so to say, country, developing country. But in fact, we have many relatives, and so how? It's impossible, because of course Ukrainians and Russians, we have so many friends, relatives, people are working, and me personally, I worked with Russians for a long time, and actually it was a guy from Tomsk who told me the half an hour before I heard the first bomb, wake up, it seems that we try to invent you. I said, what? Like, it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and he wrote me that it seems that we are trying to conquer you. It sounds very strange. And but you know, we were not like afraid. It was, you have very strange and weird feeling. It's very different from everything which is on movies, which is on TV, which was told by our grandparents. It's just your unique feeling. And now I can say that I told you like a couple of minutes before we started, that one more feature which unites all Ukrainians now, it will be post-traumatic stress disorder. Unfortunately, I feel this now when I come back. We felt this when we are relocated. It's a bit different, but when you come back home, I was not only in Kiev, last week I was in Odessa and Izmail, and all these towns and cities are very different, and people behave differently. So when in Kiev, people, when they hear this air alarm, they go to, maybe they don't run to shelters to hide somewhere, but they try not to be in the streets, for example, or try to go in cities like Mykolaiv. People go between 2 walls, yeah, they hide between 2 walls, or go to bomb shelters. In Odessa, people go to balconies, to terraces, to take a look. In Izmail, everybody, they're just like irritated with alarms, that's it. And that is the difference. And that is the difference, because in Izmail, for example, and in this area, they didn't have any, thanks God, any bombing now. In Kiev, people are a bit frightened because they had to overcome this. And this is also, I don't think that it's like Ukrainian identity, it's just human identity, humanity, because you would never understand until you feel this yourself. It's like in 2014 or 15, Kiev, people in Kiev were just in cafes and restaurants while we had war in eastern part. And people who came from eastern part, they told stories. And for people who, these were like stories, scary stories. So I'm really happy that we do this project, and that people share their opinions, and it's very important now, because it's not only about Ukrainians and to tell people, the world about Ukrainians. It's about really fault of a civilized world and some evil world, which it shouldn't be in the 21st century. It's like 19th or even 17th century and 21st century. It shouldn't be like this. So that's it. Sorry for taking a bit longer.
Not at all. And you know, this is what's so interesting, right? Like the variety of experiences, you being right there, and bringing us like from 2019 to present day in a very physical way. Myroslav, I'd like to move on to you and ask you, building on what Anzhelika was saying about that diversity of identities, of feelings, of experiences, but all being united as Ukrainian. As a historian, having studied the history with that perspective, how do you think that this specific project that we're talking about showcases that diversity, and what does it tell us from your perspective about Ukrainian identities and culture?
Well, I've always had to struggle to get a Ukrainian point of view across, because the dominant point of view, even in Slavic studies in universities, has always been the Russian one, the Russian narrative. So I'm thrilled that the ROM has allowed the Ukrainian narrative, or Ukrainian narratives from Ukraine, to be heard. I think that's very important. There's always been a lack of awareness about Ukraine, and the Ukrainian voice has often been missing in wider conversations. So this is tremendous that that the ROM has been able to gather these voices. And the problem is that there is another narrative, a narrative basically that is propounded by, professed by Russian leaders, that Ukraine does not exist. So it's a struggle for existence. All Ukrainians today, all people from Ukraine today will tell you this, that they are a people, they are a nation, they are a state, they are a culture, they are a language. And they need to emphasize, they want to emphasize this. So finally, somebody has begun listening. Unfortunately, it's because of the war that began in 2014 and that has taken a drastic turn in this year. But there's an opportunity now to listen to these voices. I have to say that when the project started, we were still in a phase when many people simply thought that Ukrainians should give up. I don't know if you remember the press coverage from that time, but many prominent politicians would say, oh, you know, this is hopeless. Ukrainians have a hopeless situation. They should just subordinate themselves to Russia. It will be much less painful. Many fewer sacrifices will be necessary. Many people also were not aware or were not convinced that this was a separate country with a separate identity. If you look back, you'll see all those maps of Ukraine where the East is divided from the West, where the different languages are spoken, and you know, is this really a country? Can they really be called a separate people? There are also many stereotypes about Ukrainians, many prejudices towards Ukrainians, all because the dominant narrative has been shaped and formed, broadcast from elsewhere, mainly from Moscow. So the project, I think, was a wonderful one in that it allowed the voices of people in Ukraine to speak. And, you know, as we've heard from other speakers, the diversity, the multicultural nature of the country came through. So the voice of contemporaries, I think, is really important here, and of young people, because they are the ones that are driving what is happening in Ukraine today. So from my point of view, this is an opening, a wonderful new beginning. And finally, people are listening. People are reading about Ukraine. People are translating contemporary authors into English and other languages. There is a thirst for knowledge about, you know, this country. And it raises the question, where did this begin? It is not 30 years. 30 years has changed Ukraine profoundly, but there have been many uprisings and revolts and struggles in the 20th century and before. The independence periods were actually, or semi-independence, autonomous periods were actually quite long, 17th, 18th century. all Ukrainians will tell you that they had periods of independence before that as well. So I think this is a great opportunity to hear these voices, to understand what people are thinking, and to how they are phrasing the new narrative. And the war today actually has proven many of the things, or has confirmed many of the things these people spoke about. This idea of an identity that is a civic identity, in which people of different national backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds come together. I'll just give one example. Jews in Ukraine no longer identify themselves as Russian Jews. They identify themselves as Ukrainian Jews. That's a big change. And it's something that people in the immigration need to be aware of and take a hint from.
Thank you so much, Myroslav. I recognize that we have 20 minutes left till the end of this program. So before we move on to the Q&A sessions, and I encourage our viewers, if you have any questions for any of the panelists, please feel free to share them as you think of them. But what I'd like to do is just ask all of you why you think, I mean, we know why now. It has brought, the efforts to the fore with this sense of urgency. But as this project launches next week and people visit it, it being digital, there are no, there are no confinements. People across the world can experience it. What would you like local and global audiences to walk away with after their personal experience with this project? And Myroslav, I'm going to come back to you to answer first.
There, I've unmuted myself. Hope you can hear me. Well, I think exactly what has been already mentioned here, that this is a big country, large population. There are people from different regions, but they are united. There is an enormous solidarity in the population today. I think this has been surprising, even shocking to many people. And it is around the idea of a political identity, the drive to create a multi-ethnic, multicultural, democratic, independent state. I think that's what comes through a lot. And as far as immigration goes, this flood of refugees, emigres, has now spread throughout the Ukrainian diaspora, and has actually brought together different currents in the diaspora. The Ukrainian diaspora is one of the great diasporas. For 130 years, generations have been emigrating. And they all have different views because they all arrived at different times, having different experiences, different memories, and not just people of Ukrainian background, but all sorts of groups emigrated from Ukraine. This experience today, this war, has brought together all these people. It's been the new immigration has been the leaven that has created a new attitude, a new awareness. So I think people should enjoy the interviews. They should also find them stimulating and a great learning experience.
Daniela, you're next on my screen, so I'll ask you the same question.
So for me, as somebody who started out as a journalist, I try not to go into projects with a certain narrative, especially when this is the nature of the project. I prefer to just present people's interviews as they are and let people take from that what they will. What I think people will take away is that there is a diversity of opinions and voices and experiences in Ukraine, but whether they know how to articulate their identity or not, they're all very much dedicated to protecting it.
Anzhelika, anything that you'd like to share with our viewers today on what you hope they might or others might walk away from after experiencing the digital program?
Yeah, for me, first of all, I think that people want to show that they are different. Ukrainians are different from Russians and from Belarus people. So Slavic people are not only the one nation or something. And we feel the difference because during the Soviet Union times, we heard so much lies, and elder generations, unfortunately, still many of them, they live in these lies. And that's why actually we have what happened at some point. And so now people try to show that they're different. That's the first thing. That Ukraine, it's not just some, it's Malorussia, yeah, it's like small Russia or something, this post-colonial or something way of thinking. Because at the very beginning, we were the elder brother of Russia, and then it's changed. That's why this story is unique, because colonization was vice versa. Like, first of all, Kiev, then Moscow appeared. And at some point of the history, they seems mixed up. And that's why this existence story began many centuries ago. And another thing is that most of Ukrainians do not want to live anywhere else except their country. And this is also a big difference between maybe other refugees. That's why we are mostly called relocated people, not refugees or something. Yes, some people will live in Europe or in other countries, but most of them will return. And believe me, is that millions of people like me, so we were just waiting an opportunity to go back home. Unfortunately, thousands of us now have nothing. So, and I can tell you that now, like there were 3 groups of relocated people. The first group are, so to say, people who were relocated at the very beginning when this invasion just started. Then it's a group of people like me, for example, who, thanks God, we have everything at home, but our relatives, parents, or some, and everybody, they left in Ukraine. And I was, for example, I was the only one who went abroad of my family. And the third group, people who actually lost everything. And all these groups are very different now, and all these groups have different trauma now, and the attitude between themselves is also different. And it's strange that people, yes, you may find that people behave differently, and that is the main idea. So I think that yes, this and the widows, of course, the widows, they show the different ways of thinking of people. It's very interesting, like it's before and after, so to say, yeah, with their hopes in 2019 and what actually happened in 2022. So that's it.
Thank you, Anzhelika, and I think in your response you've addressed some of the questions that have come up. I'm very conscious of time, so Risa, I'm going to ask you that, but I will combine it with one of the questions we received, with, you know, again, the question being, what do you hope people will walk away from? But also, oh, and I think it has disappeared. Oh, there it is. Can you tell us how you plan to reach as many people as possible with this important project?
Well, I think for us as a team, the important part of this project was really to bring it back to people and voices. I think so much of what we watch on the news, if we watch the news or Twitter or whatever it is, however you get your information, lacks a personal connection. Not everybody knows somebody in Ukraine. Not everybody is connected to the country. But for those of us who were connected, those voices were very important, and we wanted to share those voices with as many people as possible. I see one question that asked, did we revisit people? And the answer is we couldn't revisit everybody, but we did revisit some people. And I'll give you a great example of how these voices are so important. One of the people that we interviewed by accident, quite frankly, back in 2019 was a young chef who had just won MasterChef Ukraine. And we ate in his restaurant and we interviewed him, and he spent a lot of time telling us how for him, Ukrainian identity came through food, through cuisine. And his research into identity involved going back into archives and trying to resuscitate, if you will, recipes from old Ukraine before the Soviet period. And his restaurant was trying to renew these recipes and make them relevant and teach people that, there's more to Ukrainian cuisine than borscht, although he's a very big fan of borscht as well. And now he's had to completely pivot his restaurant. He's actually gone to Lviv and opened a different restaurant because Lviv is really a center for transit and refugees. And it's open for everyone. People who can pay, people who can't. He provides food to anybody who needs it. He's still very, very committed to this identity project through Cuisine, but it's become a very different project for him. And he's actually become a kind of a celebrity through this. So it'll be very interesting to hear in one of the upcoming videos what he has to say. In terms of reaching the largest possible audience, the ROM website is a great place to start, because obviously the ROM is an important cultural center in Canada. I hope that my university will also drive some traffic. We have partnered with the Ukrainian Institute in Ukraine, which is a very important institution that cultivates Ukrainian culture in diaspora, and obviously lots and lots of word of mouth. I hope that people will understand that there's more to this situation than maps and borders and superpowers, but at the very, very basic level, it's a story about people and their feelings about who they are, the language they speak, the country in which they live. And ultimately, that's a very, very important and moving story.
Thanks, Risa. And have you revisited some of those people whom you interviewed?
We have. Let's see, I'm trying to think. So we conducted about 40 interviews altogether. I think we've revisited on video 4 or 5 of them, but certainly we've been in touch with almost everybody. Everybody is okay. People are in different situations. Anzhelika for a long time was in Spain. Now she's back in Ukraine. Vasil Mitsko, who's also working with us on our project, has been in Lviv the entire time. Chef I mentioned. So everybody is okay. Their lives obviously are very, very different, but their thoughts on identity haven't really changed that much. And I would also say that nobody is very surprised. They all, in a way, saw this coming. The question was, when?
Right.
And in fact, in some of the videos that you'll see, they're very poignant comments back in 2019 about exactly this sort of situation playing out.
Yeah, it's, and I think that's something that I think earlier on was mentioned as well, this idea of this has always been something, or, you know, like in the mind of the Ukrainians who you spoke to, this is not something that's surprising. Anzhelika was talking about nobody's rushing and panicking. There's this level of not acceptance, but I would say foresight on and a reality check on where things are. I just want to thank everyone for joining us for this program. I'm sorry we don't have enough time to address all the questions here, but what I would say is I would really encourage all of you to touch upon what Risa was talking about. Please talk to your friends about this, talk to your family. I would encourage you to explore this project once it's live and help us reach more audiences, so that, again, this idea of, you know, personal identification, it's not something that's unique to the Ukrainians. It's something we can all relate with. And this idea of what Daniela was talking about when they were talking to people about Ukrainian identity, and her thinking about, well, what is Canadian identity? These are questions that crop up in all of our minds. So please do check this out. I do want to say that this project will be live as of August 24th. Thank you so much, Risa, Myroslav, Anzhelika, and Daniela. Thank you for joining us for today's program and for sharing your experiences on this project. Details of all upcoming ROM at Home online programs can be found on ROM's website, as well as our social media channels. And, you know, we really hope that today's conversation inspires you to explore the subject of Ukrainian culture and identities through the digital project. Thanks again to the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter for supporting this program. Hoping to hear more from you as you visit the digital experience and share with us your thoughts. Thank you very much.